Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Interact Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kaelyn Grace Apple, a content creator. And I came across your content, I believe, on LinkedIn and then followed over to YouTube. And I really like the way that you present content, the topics that you've chosen. It's super interesting and unique. So I wanted to have you on the podcast. Tell us how you got into creating content and what inspired you to turn on the camera and start recording.
So technically, I began making content when I was about 12, I think. I was really fascinated by the kind of early days of YouTube, and I had like a silly camcorder kind of camera that my sister and I would take out to the barn, and it was the first summer that we had a horse, and so we just got all these really silly videos, and I started editing bits and pieces together. And originally I just made content about my athletic career. And then I took a bit of a break from it when I decided to pursue education, but always kind of paid attention to what YouTubers were doing. And I always loved following, especially like study based creators. And so when I went off to UCLA, I had said, I really want to start making study content. And I didn't really do it consistently at any point during my undergrad. I would kind of try pulling out the camera and try to get comfortable with it. But the goal at the time was not to grow. It wasn't to even have like a regular posting schedule. It was just to have fun and document the experience. When it started to change for me was when I got into my master's program, because as far as I was aware, there weren't very many people online that were talking about the path of a non-traditional scholar from community college up through going to an elite university for graduate school. And there were quite a lot of resources at my university, but I still didn't know very many people that had gone the direction of having had a career, then going to community college and then navigating academia. And so that's when I really kind of identified the mission behind the content and the purpose. And that's when I started posting consistently once or twice a week in order to document my journey through education, and also to share the resources that I was gaining from the experience, because things like admissions, how to write grant proposals, essays, that kind of thing, it just was obscured from my knowledge because I didn't have parents that had gone to graduate school. And so I wanted to start kind of sharing that experience. And now here we are 6 years later after having started that consistent pattern of creating content.
So cool. It's so cool. It's cool that you just identified something that was like a gap and then it's like I could do that. What do you like about creating content? Because you've been doing it for a while now. So like what keeps you going with it?
I love the storytelling element of it. What I love to go back to is I have a documented like visual and like auditory experience of what I was going through for the past 6 years at any given time. And while there were some things that I would be very open about, there are also things that, I know going back and rewatching that was happening in the behind the scenes that I wasn't talking about necessarily in the videos. And it's just this really great kind of memory bank. And that to me is what I really love about making content most, is having that archive of mine visible to others, but also for myself. And also that I've been able to create resources and access routes for others that otherwise wouldn't have thought that it was accessible to them or that it was possible for them. And in doing so, I've generated a community that I feel very close to. I've made some of my best friends are because of YouTube. And yeah, I can't imagine not creating the content now. And it's wild just being able to look back and have this catalog.
How do you fit it in with everything else that you're doing? Like how much editing are you doing? Like how much time does it take? And how have you managed to stay consistent while you're continuing your academic career?
So the one thing that interests me about the question, I guess 'cause I get it a lot, is it's always a matter of time, rather than a matter of enjoyment. Like I
Hmm.
really enjoy editing. I really like the process of editing and learning new editing techniques and figuring out a different style of content, trying new transitions, or trying a different kind of structure for an Instagram carousel. To me, it's always a bit of an experiment, and it's this creative outlet. And so to me, the time doesn't necessarily, I guess, like factor into what I decide what to do or what not to do, because if I'm interested in it, if I'm enjoying the experience of it, then I find that the time doesn't necessarily matter. But that being said, in terms of like the actual logistics, I spend about 3 hours a week editing for YouTube. And then at the moment, Substack is actually taking up a significant amount of my time because I've transitioned a bit from making kind of education content to really trying to focus on making public history content. And as a historian, as somebody that's actually trained to write in an academic way, one, learning how to write for a public audience is a bit of a challenge that I'm coming up against. And also that I don't use AI. I actively reject the use of AI in my research practice. And so when I am writing an article, I am going and spending the time reading, 3 to 5 peer-reviewed journals, thinking through how I want to craft that article, what the argument's going to be, what's the focus. And so that's currently taking a lot of time. I'm hoping that as I develop the muscle, it will take less, and then I can pull together an Instagram reel in like 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes. So it varies greatly, depending on the degree of complexity. But yeah, I would say on average, I spend about like 5 to 6 hours a week on content.
Okay, that's not bad. That's not, I mean, that's
No.
that's pretty efficient. Um, I am curious to double click on that idea of taking a more complex concept and turning it into content for a mass audience. I feel like I see that a lot as an issue and a barrier, almost a barrier to entry for a lot of people. They're
Mm,
like, well, I do have good knowledge. I have a lot of things that are interesting, but like, I try to put it out there and it competes with the latest, I don't know, basketball highlights or whatever. And like,
yep.
who's gonna read this like in-depth thing? How do you do that?
So one, I think it's about audience and identifying the audience that does really enjoy long form content and is willing to sit with their attention on long form content instead of trying to cater to somebody that you are competing against the highlight reel on of sports or entertainment. That's not my audience. That's not the person that's going to connect with what I'm putting out. So that's number one, is actually identifying like, who am I trying to reach? Who am I trying to speak to? And then the second thing is, how can I craft the click through in such a way that it's attractive to somebody that doesn't know anything about this? So the thing that academics and intellectual creators get wrong is presenting, for example, a title on a YouTube video like they would an article, but that's not going to get them good click through. And so what I do with my clients is like coaching them through, how do we get the title and the thumbnail to click through for somebody that might be interested, but they need the incentive, they need the visual incentive, they need the kind of clickbait that actually gets them into the video. And then how do we really optimize the hook and whatnot, so that way we can keep their attention. And the way that we keep somebody's attention, again, is very dependent on the audience. But trying to think about, how do we get that initial reaction? How do we get that initial interaction with an audience member? And deciding, there are certain degrees of clickbait that I would say is actually going to turn off somebody who is intellectually curious. And so it's trying to find the balance of, how do we present things in such a way that it catches somebody's attention, but that it's catching the right person in such a way that they actually want to listen.
That's really fascinating. It sounds like a lot of psychology. Like you're
It
trying
is.
to figure out like what hooks somebody, but not just for the sake of hooking them. It has to hook the right person. I
Yes.
mean, that to me, I hear that and I'm like, well, you need to know a lot about like who the person is and
Hmm.
how they're wired. How do you talk people through that, or how do you do it for yourself? Like,
Mm.
I don't know. I guess my perception is like humans don't necessarily typically pay attention to other humans that much. Like we pay a lot more attention to what we want.
Mm.
And what you're talking about is like you got to pay attention to what the audience wants. So how do you do that or coach people through how to do that?
That's such an interesting take because I find like I'm so curious about human behavior and what gets people to react and how they react and what emotions does that elicit and whatnot. And what I kind of found was that my content best suits women in their late 20s up through their 50s. And they are generally curious about the humanities. They're interested in history, philosophy, uh, history, but they didn't necessarily take the traditional path of academia. Whether they left after undergrad, they left in the middle of undergrad, or they have like a master's degree, but they didn't necessarily go on to a PhD. So my kind of target, the people that react best to my content and that I interact best with, are those who are very intellectually curious, but who themselves don't necessarily know where they fit in the grand scheme of academia. And they feel like, I have these interests, I have these curiosities, but I'm not a part of academia, so I don't feel like I can participate. And what I try to do is create content that assures them that no, you can have this intellectual curiosity, you can foster it, and there are spaces for you. It just might not be in a graduate program or it might not be in traditional academia. And so, how do I make the content speak to that person and offer them some sense of comfort? So, the other question to ask, and that I talk through my clients with, is when somebody leaves your content, what do you want them to do? What do you want them to feel? And oftentimes, especially educational channels, like, oh, I want them to have learned something, but I want you to be a little bit more specific. Like, do you want them to have learned a fact or do you want them to have learned a process? Do you want them to have learned a way of thinking? And for me, what's important is less like the actual raw information of what I'm sharing about legal case or somebody in history or an event. That part is less circumstantial to me than did they engage with the way that I developed that kind of historical argument, and did they understand the process of how to create historical research so that they feel empowered to do this themselves? Did they walk away from this feeling like empowered to keep learning? And that's what I really want them to leave with. And so yeah, there's a whole process I go through, a whole like workshop with my clients to figure out, who do they interact best with? So who are they surrounded with by in terms of their friends? Who do they tend to have like really strong rapport with right off the bat? So when they're in public settings at a networking event or a conference or, at a dinner party, like who do they attract and who are they attracted to speaking to? And what are the topics that are the most interesting to them to speak about? What do they feel passionate about conveying? And then we kind of like continue the road from there in order to figure out, what's that kind of key audience member, and then how do you speak to them and not worry about the noise of like, I need to appeal to everyone.
That's really interesting. So you're starting with like what actually happens in their regular life and then translating that into like an internet setting. Do you notice any patterns in terms of like, okay, if a certain person is wired this way, they typically attract this type of audience? Like, are there patterns to that?
To an extent, yes. So one kind of gender dynamic that I've noticed, I've had many men and women as clients, and women attract more community building in terms of the business and in terms of the audience, whereas the male creators that I've worked with, their audience really seeks debate and really seeks information. And so their comment section, the way that people interact in the comment section is more so like digging into the facts and like trying to add another take and like really engaging in that discourse that was presented in that educational piece of content. Whereas what I find is that women in their comments, if it's a primarily female audience, tend to like offer encouragement and other types of kind of like emotional support, and it's less substantial in terms of the actual kind of like educational debate back and forth. So that's kind of one common trend that I notice. And yeah, there are many others, but that's one that I've noticed in having clients that are all educational creators, but are, two sides of of a gendered spectrum in terms of who their audience is and how that inner audience interacts with their content.
How does that translate back into, like, if you're telling a story around an informative piece of content? It's like an informative piece of content, but you also want it to have a story to it.
Yes.
And then you know that your audience is primarily male or primarily female, or they just have those tendencies regardless
Yeah.
of what gender they are. Um, how do you think about that when you're like crafting the content? Like, do you think about how this is going to relate to somebody that's more community oriented, even though the piece of content you're talking about is very
Mm.
factual?
I wouldn't say that there's like a direct trend in terms of storytelling style. I know what I tend to gravitate towards creating. But I think that's more so about who I am as a historian than it is how it is that I strategically create content. I am a social historian, a social and legal historian, so I really care about people. I really care about how they interact and what did they eat and what did they say and what did they feel about this particular thing and how did they perceive this particular event. Whereas I have many colleagues that, for example, are economic historians who make educational content about economics, in which case, like broad figures and understanding economic trends and looking more at like kind of like a global macro scale is more interesting to them and to their audience. So I don't necessarily know that there's like a specific trend because it is dependent on what the creator themselves is passionate about.
Okay, so here's my question that's in my head. If you are talking to somebody that has a lot of good stuff to offer, and you are trying to chart a path for them, like let's say it's one of your clients, you're trying to chart a path where it's like, how will you remain consistent,
Mm,
as just a broad question? How do
okay.
you approach that?
So when I'm working with a client or when I'm running a course, I create kind of an accountability system between them and myself. So one way that I do this is if somebody's trying to grow on short form, I will say, okay, so you need to post once a day, Monday to Thursday. And if you fail to post, you get one buffer day. So let's say you get sick on a Tuesday, you can move that content to the Friday, but you can't miss more than one day. If you miss more than one day, you owe me a book.
A book?
Yeah. I mean, I love books. So,
Like, oh,
uh,
like you have to buy you a book or they have to read a
yeah.
book?
No, they have to send me a book.
Okay, okay, okay.
But the same goes reciprocally. Like I also need to post on those days. Otherwise, I owe
Hmm.
them a book.
Hmm.
And it is the one kind of accountability system that I've noticed works best because the thing about human behavior, generally speaking, is that humans react to punishment or the fear of punishment and uh negative reinforcement much more than positive reinforcement in the immediate. And so you have to, in order for accountability to work between like two people or multiple people, there has to be something at stake. There has to be something that person feels that they're going to lose. There has to be a negative consequence for not doing the thing. So if you're going to create an accountability system with a friend, there needs to be a negative reinforcement. Like the goal of saying, like, if you post 30 times this month, then you'll get, some kind of reward is not enough incentive for human beings to do it, typically.
That
And
checks out. That checks
yeah.
out. Continue, continue. Yeah, I feel like I have more to say.
And so the other thing about consistency is developing a muscle. So I always say that you have to figure out what your minimum viable output could be. And for most people, if you say, okay, every Monday you need to do X, and you start small, it's like saying every Monday at 9 o'clock, you need to post on LinkedIn. The second part that I recommend when somebody's getting started is start with a series. So start with something that has some kind of promise to yourself or to your audience. And also at the end of the post, you have to signpost for yourself and for your audience what's coming the next week. So it's saying, for example, next week I'm going to show you how I break down an offer. So that when you sit on Sunday night writing that post and you're like, oh God, I don't want to do it. I don't know what to say. There's one, there's social pressure because you've told other people you're going to do it. And two, you've signposted exactly what it is that you are going to share. And so you have the idea prepped and ready.
How do you
So,
handle like 'cause I totally agree with you on the negative versus positive. Like the fear of punishment is so much stronger than like the reward of like, oh, you're gonna get all these reviews or clients or whatever. But how do you handle the positive side? Because at some point, I would imagine people get a little burnt out where it's just like, oh well, it's the fear of this
mm,
punishment, but at some point, I want this content to start delivering.
yeah.
And usually that means some sort of monetary thing because that's just how the world works, the economy. Um, how do you handle it when it's like you're 3 weeks in or 9 weeks in and it's just not really delivering?
Well, if you were 9 weeks in and you were being consistent on any social media platform within the demands of their algorithm and you're still not growing, the problem is the content. So, the first thing that you have to solve as a creator is, can I get consistent? So that's, number one, can I develop the muscle? Can I show up regularly so an audience can trust that I'm going to be there? The second stage is, do I have enough data to show me what performs well? Now, if you've been consistently posting, for, let's say on Instagram, if you've been consistently posting for 6 weeks, 4 times a week, you should have enough data by that point to know what kind of content your audience reacts well to, what kind of content is not getting the reach, and then you can double down on iterating on the content that is performing well. So the second stage is collect the data, analyze the data, act on the data. Then from there, it's okay, so now we have the data, we have the content, we're getting some performance. How do we structure conversion? What do we think about the goals in terms of, are we signing on to a service? Are we signing on to a newsletter? Am I getting people to comment? Like, what's the engagement? So step one, consistency. Step two, getting good. Step three is engagement.
All right. Before people work with you versus after, I don't know if you know this data, but
I do.
before or after, what's the drop off for each stage? Because I feel like it's very high if you're not
Ah,
working with somebody like yourself, and then it's much lower if you have somebody that you're working with.
So the one thing I will say is that I do not work one-on-one or in a group coaching setting with anybody that hasn't made it to stage two.
Hmm.
So there's a barrier to entry to work with me and get my kind of hands-on audit of your content. You have to have gotten the consistency part down because the drop off and the consistency part is like 90%. So many people can't get through that first hurdle of showing up regularly for 6, 12 weeks, whatever it may be, because again, the positive reinforcement, it's too long in the future. It's like the time horizon to reward it feels too long off. And so I really only work with people that have shown me that consistency, because then I'm like, okay, now we can play, now we can deal with the data, now we can really get moving. When I do a course, like when I do kind of a lower ticket offer, then I start at that early stage, but then I incorporate those accountability measures in order for that person to get moving. But even then even with those accountability measures, I find the drop offs about 50%.
Yep.
So I really prioritize working with people that have that consistency part down. And the thing that's been the biggest kind of leap is, like, for example, I have a client who I worked with last year, and she was consistent, but she would not analyze the data. She would not make any changes to her content. Like, her content, the titles, the thumbnails, all of it was like the same for the last 2 years. And or even like even basically the entire time she'd been on YouTube. And I was like, there's no reason that you should be on YouTube for 9 years and not see performance. So the issue is the content. And so I started working with her, and it took a while to like convince her to like make the change because she was so kind of set. And once I finally, developed a relationship with her, we developed that trust, then she was like willing to start making some changes. And in, I think it was like 5 months into working together. Again, like we had to develop this trust. She wasn't implementing the strategies. And then October hit, she gained 1,000 subscribers in a month. And then November hit and she doubled and she hit 11. So that to me was showing like, okay, we've got the consistency down, but you haven't gotten past stage 2. Like stage 2 was about analyzing the data, understanding your audience, really digging into the content strategy, and then developing a roadmap to think about scale. But we can't really think about scale. We can't really think about engagement. We can't really think about offers and building the business structure unless we've gotten phase 2 sorted out and we know what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, I like how you're laying this out. It's all so simple. Our company Interact it's stage 3, so it's like the offer stage, and we do these personality quizzes or whatever quizzes. It's like
Yep.
a opt-in thing, and we see the same thing where it's like somebody will be sitting at that point they already have a ton of followers and ton of engagement, but maybe their email list is really small, and then we implement like an improved offer, and then the email
Mhm.
list jumps, just like you're talking about, the subscribers jump. But I like how you're breaking it down into these 3 stages. It's like you got to get started, consistency. Once you have consistency, then you got to optimize for engagement, and then once you optimize for engagement, then you got to optimize for conversion. There's 3
Yep.
distinct phases. But the drop off is 90% on
Yep.
stage 1 to stage 2. It's like it's always been that way. From a human, I don't know, observation perspective, why is that? Why is it like everybody drops off at that stage?
I mean, that's when it gets hard. Like, we really love shiny new things. Humans love picking up new projects. Humans love getting attracted to new opportunities. And what you realize is about, I would say, like 3 to 4 weeks in. 5 weeks is usually the steep drop off point for most people. Is that by that point you're like, okay, I've put in the effort, I put in the hours, I should be seeing some results. And I think it's partly a mindset thing, and it's also a bit of mental resilience to say this is just the experimenting stage. This is not about growth, this is not about numbers, this is not about anything but learning. This is just, can I develop the muscle? And it's the same thing as human beings, like going to the gym or picking up a new sport. The early stages, it's easy to go to the gym the first time. Second time, okay. Third time, much harder. Fourth time, we may not show up because the novelty wears off, and then we realize, like, actually, like the adrenaline and the excitement and the dopamine hit, like that's now gone, and now I have to just rely on grit. And that's where you see the people that really enjoy process start to really flourish, and the people that really like reward drop off.
Mm. And the best thing that you found is this two-sided accountability structure. Like, we're
That's
going
what
to
I
do
have
it
found.
together.
The thing is, like, that system's going to work for somebody who is motivated. Um and in fairness, I haven't had a client who that it's not been successful with, but also I'm very selective about which clients I work with. Mostly because I want them to have a good time. I want them to see results. I want them to enjoy working together, and I want them to get results. I want to know that the methods that I'm helping them employ are actually, working. And I can't do that if there's not a delivery. And yeah, so when I work with a client one to one, I actually have so it's a 3 month minimum, but I actually will not sign somebody for more than 3 months the first time I work with them, because the 3 months tells me whether or not they can get consistent and they can start actually having data for us to analyze. Because if there's not enough content, if there's not enough, honestly, statistical data for us to discuss and to audit and to workshop, then you're paying so much money for a one-to-one service, or you're paying so much money for a group coaching service that you're not actually utilizing. And so to me, I don't feel good about working with a client who's not seeing the results, because they're paying a lot of money for something that I want them to be successful at. And so I'll give them homework and I'll say, if you can go off and focus on these like 1 to 2 things, and if you can show me that you've delivered on that, then I'll re-sign you and we'll come back in as a client. But for now, focus on focus on consistency.
Yeah. As I'm just thinking in my head as we're talking, I'm like, it's so fascinating how this world of like creators is the broadest word for it works because on the surface, it looks like it's the people that are like very reward driven. They're just always going after like the biggest, latest, shiny thing. But what you're saying, and I agree, is that the people who actually make it through and are the ones that you see are the ones that are more process oriented.
Yes.
They're not chasing the next greatest thing, even if like the content they're making kind of feels like they are. That's only because that's what works for the
Yeah.
general public. They are not driven by that personally. They're driven more by the process and the enjoyment of like, I'm going to make this and I'll make it better. And then I'll look at what's working. And I'll optimize that. And you get really into that process. Like I was watching Alex Honnold, that free solo guy.
Mm.
And he was like, yeah, the day after I did the free solo, I just climbed again. Like, what else are you going
Yeah.
to do? Like, you like the process. And
Yes.
God, I wish more people would adopt that.
Yeah. And I think it's figuring out like what process do you enjoy? And, you know, I also think it's about developing the muscle because the problem is that consistency stage is so uncomfortable. It's like getting a sore muscle. It's like, oh, I don't want to do it anymore. This is so much work. And you don't ever get like they don't ever get to the stage where you feel the muscle develop and finally you feel stronger, you feel more capable. And I think it's really important also, even as a seasoned creator, to always put yourself back in a place of challenge. So yes, you know you've created that consistency, you have the data of what works, but there should still always be a part of your process that's experimenting. For me, I feel like I've experimented a lot in the last 2 years to very, very positive as well as very negative results. Like I've had videos that have completely flopped and other videos that have done extremely well. But at the end of the day, the thing that's most important is like, what do I enjoy creating? What can I show up consistently to do? But if I don't test those theories, if I don't experiment, I never know what kind of growth I can take my channel on and what kind of journey as a brand, as a personal brand, what I can develop into. Because if I only focus solely on what worked in the past and just continue to recreate it, then I'm not actually getting better. I'm just regurgitating. And that works to an extent, but I also think you need to be experimenting and figure out, what other tools can you insert into your toolkit. And so for me, for example, like I'm back kind of at square one trying to build up this public historian focus. And that's really uncomfortable for me. Like writing the articles, doing the research, getting my kind of intellectual work out there is so incredibly uncomfortable by comparison to posting a YouTube video or going and posting on LinkedIn. I can do that easily now because I have the consistency. But now it's, let's experiment with something new and see how that aligns.
I agree like wholeheartedly with how important that is because we started prior to the pandemic, and in the pandemic there was a massive shift that we witnessed in terms of what content audiences were actually responding to and what
Yes.
platforms. And the number of business owners who were creator led, like they were content led businesses who never shifted to this new reality because that muscle of starting something new was just non existent. So
Yes.
they kept posting the same stuff and it was just getting less and less results. And then they all just shut their businesses down, like
Yeah.
thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of them. And it was like an extinction event. And I'm like, if you don't want to become extinct as a content creator, you have to have that muscle. So I like that you're saying that. It's like, yes, you have the backbone, it's working, it's printing money or whatever, like great. But you have to constantly work this other muscle because
Yes.
you will need it. And that cycle happens historically like every 7 years, like things
Yeah.
reset, new stuff comes along, a new platform comes out. You got to learn how to do TikToks now or whatever. And if you don't, then you're just going to become a dinosaur.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and you can see the trend, like looking at creators now, and the way that we deliver content, like the style of the video, especially right now with AI, the really polished, like sitting down in a perfect filming studio and like, just having a perfect script on how to, on a productivity method or whatever it may be, isn't performing the way it was 3 years ago. And I think that's largely because now there's a desire for more kind of human, raw interaction. And so, how do we adapt to different formats? And you can also decide that there are certain types of content that you're okay with not performing well. Like, I, for example, don't see huge results on vlogs, but for me, I never want to lose those memories. I never want to lose my enjoyment of creating videos. And for me, vlogs are where it's at in terms of joy. And so to me, it's important that I continue making vlogs, even if they don't perform as well. And then the other kind of 50% of my content strategy is focused on optimization. So, how can you as a creator continue to adapt while continuing to hone your creative skills and your own ingenuity or your own enjoyment, because that's also important. I've seen a lot of creators that, they learn the style that works and they really only focus on optimizing for the audience and they burn themselves out because they don't actually enjoy the process anymore.
Yeah, I always kind of see it as like there are certain things that just work that you don't enjoy doing. I don't
Yes.
know that I've ever seen a business that doesn't work like that. And maybe
Mhm.
that's just something that people don't understand coming into this. Is like there's always going to be aspects of running your company, creating content, whatever you're doing that you do not enjoy, but they do work. And
Yep.
then there's other aspects that you really enjoy, and maybe they don't actually do that much for your business growth, but it gives you the energy that you need to go do the stuff that you don't like doing.
Yes.
And it's like a power balance. Like if you just always optimize for the thing that grows, maybe you can grit it out for a few years and build something up, but I don't think like 10, 12, 15 years, which is how long people really go, right, that are successful. They've been going for at least a decade, maybe two. So you have to have the things that build you up so that you can then go spend that energy on the things that make you tired.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when I'm talking to clients about strategy, I am really focused on optimizing not just for growth, but how do we optimize for longevity in your creator career and in your business. And I always say that the kind of like sweet spot to me is like, I say it's one for them, one for you. So one piece of content that's made for your audience and optimized, and one piece of content that just brings you enjoyment. And also, I think that in doing so, not only do you maintain your creative integrity, but I also find that that content that you're making for yourself also is what keeps the community aspect of your content alive. And I think that that's important to not forget either. It's not just about bringing in new people. It's also, can we maintain the attention and engagement and enjoyment of the audience that we've built along the way?
100%. I totally agree with that. And I'm sure you've gotten this where I'll have stuff that I've put up that, is the like for me type of content. And somebody will tell me like in person, like, oh, I really like watching those videos. And they get zero engagement. And I'm like,
Yeah.
interesting. Like it's content that like you don't react to online, but you are consuming, and it's building
Mm.
more of that like parasocial relationship
Yeah.
that creates that stickiness versus if you're always just doing the stuff that gets the high engagement, big views, maybe that works, but like in terms of actually having the longevity, not so not so great sometimes.
Yeah. Agreed.
Huh, so interesting. Well, thanks for doing this. This is like fascinating. I really love diving into this stuff. I appreciate all of your insights. Where can people follow you? And then if they are listening and they're in stage two and they're like, I would want to work with you. Where can they check that out too?
Yeah, so you can find me on socials. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Substack. It's just my name, Kaelyn Grace Apple. And I just launched Educated Social, which is a business primarily focused on helping academics and educators become business owners and public creators. So yeah, if you're an educator, if you're somebody that's looking to build kind of an intellectual brand online and hopefully educate the public, then yeah, please reach out.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much for having me.